Hey, what's up, everybody? It looks like we're live here. If again, like as we start, I just want everybody in the chat say thanks for being here, and please let me know if the audio is okay. Um, Give me a thumbs up or something in the live stream, and I would appreciate that. Today we have Chubbs with us. Chubbs is a uh, I'd say non-believer. Would you say atheist or what?
I use atheist just for the definition of it.
Sure. Okay. So um, let's see. Actually, it looks like whenever I started with, let's see. Hold on one second, Chubbs. It looks like for some reason it didn't go live on the event that I created. It went live on a different. Hang on one second. I'm just going to share the link with the people in the other chat because for some reason it went live. It didn't go live on the event that I planned.
Okay.
So all right, I sent that out. I'm just going to correct it one more time on my Discord. That way everybody can come in and then we'll. So you must not be on East Coast time then.
Me?
Yeah.
No, I'm central.
Okay. Gotcha. All right, I got that shared. Okay, yep. So it looks like we got everybody. Um, True Gamer, Gavin, appreciate you being here. How's the audio? Is everything okay with the audio? Please let me know that. And all right, so Chubbs, assuming that the audio is fine, what so you contacted me and said, hey, listen, I appreciate your way of talking to people, having discussions, these dialogues, and so forth. And you wanted to have a discussion with me. I guess we're just kind of freestyling here. What what did you want to talk about? I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah. The way I kind of go about it, and I did do a debate or two, but I've also, gotten in just to some people's channels to have conversation. A lot of stuff I heard you talk about, like I think it was the Magic Sandwich Show, and the way like the way everything's going with the back and forth. I go about it from, okay, there's enough videos where people do science, for the evolution and this and that, to the way people are breaking down the words of the scriptures and all that. But for me, I try and come from my point where, you know, I I'm just a regular family guy who's
Mhm.
I went through 12 years of Catholic school and catechism, and got. I don't think anybody's getting anywhere the way some of the people are going about trying to talk to each other. So when I've talked to some of the other, theists out there, I try and ask some some of the I don't want to say basic. I hate to use that word, but like some more simple questions that kind of have to do with the religious part. Um, just so you
Okay.
know, uh, I like I said, I use atheist just because of the definition.
Uh-huh.
Um, I'm 43. I became an atheist, if you want to call it that, at around 10. And the difference for me was I never stopped looking into it. I have like 3 Bibles next to my bed. Whenever I watch people talk. I look it up to kind of follow along.
Sure.
I also like follow the military aspect sometimes, like the Old Testament a lot more, obviously. You can follow like from Moses to Joshua down, like they're military leaders if you look at it that way, because the battles can be, like Jericho is one of my favorite stories, and they, found what seems to be that. Now the story might be different, but that that compared to like the New Testament, you know, I'm trying to pay attention. And one of the things when I heard you talk about the Nephilim, um, one of the things on my channel is I have a foot in the cryptozoology world, which is like Bigfoot and such.
Right.
And there are quite a lot that think Bigfoot is a Nephilim, all the way from like Cain, was cast to be like a hairy individual sent out into the wilderness. Enkidu from,
Epic of Gilgamesh.
yeah. So I find it funny that those connections can be made. At the same time, the subject itself is basically like religion. You have tens of thousands of people who will say, this is real, this is what happened, and everybody else is following by faith. Like, we're going to believe what you say. And I talked to some people where they said, Bigfoot's the Nephilim, and I would ask, like, well, wouldn't have the flood wipe them out? And then I get different answers every time we go. So I thought you might find that interesting because it comes up a lot. You'd be surprised. Like,
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because when I first started getting into that topic, and here's the thing, I've noticed this from years that once you open your mouth about that topic, the divine council, the Nephilim, things like that, you get pigeonholed into that conversation almost every time you talk because they go, wait, aren't you the guy that was talking about the and then they want you to, which I don't mind talking about it at all, right?
right.
I don't want to make it like my only thing that I ever talk about, of course, but an interesting parallel between what you said was when I first got involved, with looking into this, I started looking at some of the religious texts from different religions, and I did notice that, wow, this is a theme, right? But I thought, well, sure, with Semitic languages, maybe they have, but then when I looked at for example, I watched this documentary about Native Americans, and I was like, whoa, they have this same kind of story. And here's the thing is, I watched this one documentary where I had some guy that was like a curator of a Native American museum. I still got it saved somewhere. I can find it if you want to watch it. But basically, it said, look at the passage in the Bible of, Goliath and the Philistines. And it said that it had 6 fingers and 6 toes on each hand and foot, right? And I thought, wow, that's odd. I never realized that detail. I never heard of that detail. And then in the documentary, it goes, now check this out. When the natives would, the old thing where the natives go, how, they never really said how. That wasn't a thing.
Right.
But they did raise their hand to check your hand. You know? So, because, and their story was related that giants, and again, I would want to research all this to like verify all the facts, of course. I'm assuming that the documentary, that like the guy who was the curator of that Native American museum knew what he was talking about, for example. But I would just say that, I found that to be a very interesting parallel. And when you mentioned what you were mentioning, you kind of tied together. I'm not much of a Sasquatch believer or anything like that, of course, but I've never really looked into any of that. So I wouldn't, I hate to, without looking into something, I hate to just reject, things like outright. But there are even these caves in Mexico, where there's stories are that these giant people lived in these like caves, and if you look at the caves and research the caves, it's an odd little place. Like it's a strange, area. And so I
Yeah.
thought it was very interesting, but I also find it interesting that you're interested in these things. But I guess, like you said, you never really quit pursuing the story and in your interest in that. So
Well, the crypto stuff came because my my major in college was for outdoor studies because I used to spend a lot of time in the woods, and there's just like every community, there's a large community, and just like what you were saying, you can the totem poles for the Native Americans, there's a face on almost every one of them that resembles, I'll just say Sasquatch, but the really odd thing is that almost all the native tribes have a different word for the same thing. So, those are the little pieces that we find interesting. But I got into it just from being an outdoors person. But my question would be, do you think that they could have survived the flood, the Nephilim, and become something like that?
did they survive the flood? That's an interesting question. I found that there have been multiple answers. So there are a few scholars that I follow closely, and most people know my main scholar that I'm really interested in. I almost overuse Heiser, so I hate to sully his reputation with me overusing him like that. But him and others, they point out that there are a few different explanations. So, for one, they would say there are everywhere from the, a mundane claim like, yeah, they found a high enough point to where they survived the flood, or that there was some type of cave within the earth that they were shielded from, or maybe something like that. I've even heard to the extreme claims of, well, maybe they held on to the top of the ark, or maybe their seed was seed was captured in a vial and brought
Right.
over or something. Or I've even heard that story of Canaan after the flood had something to do with it. So there's there are many different ways, but it could also mean something like the same event that took place before the flood took place again after the flood.
Yeah.
So I've heard all those explanations. I don't think the text lends any of them more credibility. Well, I mean, I think, of course, some of them have more credibility than the other, just based off of logic and like what
Right.
most parsimonious. But as far as I'm not. I don't see a clear view taken in Scripture. So I would obviously just plead ignorance on what exactly occurred.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I've heard the Goliath thing come up a lot because it's such a popular story in and of itself. So I did hear about the six finger thing once or twice, and but I hear the Cain one a lot because it like specifically says that he was very hairy and made to walk the earth.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just that, when I was hearing you talking about the Nephilim, wanted to bring that up first to show you like there's a lot of connections because there's
I actually wouldn't connect the Nephilim to Cain, because that's actually a view. That's the opposite view of my view. I actually don't buy into that view because, and I'll tell you here a couple reasons why. So the reason why is because some scholars, what they try to do is they try to oppose in Genesis chapter 6, they try to oppose Cain and Seth's lines, the line of Seth and the line of Cain, and they say that when it says, sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. They took wives and they bore giants. They try to say that the sons of God were the good line of Seth, and that the daughters of mankind were the tribes that were born from Cain's line. The problem with
Okay.
that is the term there, the daughters of men, is the term the daughters of Adam, or mankind. So
Okay.
it's specifically referencing someone that's not mankind, because it's the converse. It's the sons of God saw that the daughters of mankind were beautiful. So
Right.
I wouldn't take that view, of course. Um, but also, the text doesn't really say anything about Cain in that regard. That it just says that all of the basically, I just think that it's a stretch to you know. I think that people see the story right before that of Cain killing Abel, and then they see the next chapter. They try to apply that, but I just don't find it to be biblical. So
Okay. Cool.
yeah,
Well, I have just a couple simple questions that I usually ask that I've been asking for a long time, if you don't mind.
yeah, sure. I'll answer them to the best of my ability.
Yeah, they're just more kind of, trying to get your take on it. Like, do you uh, do you believe the story of Ezekiel and the fiery chariot to be literal? Like there was actually a fiery chariot that took him away?
Um, I would want to look more into it, but I would just say, um, with Ezekiel's visions, we have to be careful, because, like, just take for example the wheels within wheels, that whole thing. Uh,
Big alien conspiracy on that one.
right,
I
it's
hear
the
a lot.
alien ship, right?
Right.
So with um, as scholars have pointed out, this whole thing about the wheels within wheels and the whole iconography of the people there, it's if you look at the people will go, well, that's a spaceship or something, but when you look at the where he was at, and you look at the iconography of that place, the thrones of the gods of that place were known to look like exactly what he was describing. He was
Right.
describing a throne of a deity, but he was having a vision of it, right? So I'd
Right.
be careful with Ezekiel's visions first. That's just my first point. But second, like, yeah, I could accept that as literally occurring, the chariot. Yeah,
Okay.
I wouldn't be. Go ahead.
Well, no, that just one of the big questions I like to ask is, if we take the Bible as it happened and that's true, so I find it kind of odd that in the Bible you have, stories from angels and demons and fiery bushes and fiery chariots. I've always found it odd that nothing has happened since 2,000 years ago. Like
Sure.
nothing's truly spectacular. I'm not talking about like a miracle, because I'm in the Catholic South and Medjugorje is a big deal still. Like pictures in schools, it's really weird. But to me, the truly amazing things, like, and I can separate some. One quick example, like the parting of the Red Sea. You know, the book says something to the effect. I don't have any of my books right next to me, but like a north wind came overnight and pushed the water. And to me, that makes a little bit more sense than what you see in the movies. So, but
Yeah, you talking about okay? So if you don't mind,
no,
let me just jump in right there.
no, go
There's
ahead.
a, there's a few things I'd like to say. Number one, your first point about, well, it's kind of strange that we don't see these things really happening now. You know, I've heard that, of course, and um, what I would first start by saying is, and I've said this before, the Bible, when you read in the Bible, you may think that it's, saying that there are miracles all over the place, but it's more like, I like to explain it like ESPN highlights. It's the reason why these things were written down where, because people go, what just happened, right? If it was just normal thing to happen all the time, nobody would have written it down, because they'd just been like, oh yeah, the thing that usually happens with the chariot or whatever. But the reason why people wrote that down is because they go, wow, this is a shared like miracle thing that happened. So I would just say that like they didn't happen as often as it seems sometimes to people. But and then the other thing I would say is um, there were 3 points I wanted to make. One more point is that, so after Christ came, right? I would say that a lot of the things that happened pre-Christ were to, obviously show signs. And Christ said things like, this generation will receive no sign, and things like that. But there was one more part that I wanted to say that I did, the last part of what you said. I was trying to remember what it was, because oh yeah, no, I remember. You're saying that, okay, so the parting of the sea, like I can understand like this natural thing, like a wind blew or something, right? But see, my problem with that, because like there's a guy sitting on apologetics, Rob, who I really like, and I agree with Rob on a lot of things, right? But I remember listening to him talk to I believe it was Arn Robb about this, and he was like, okay, so there was this like event that happens, this naturally occurring event where basically that window would have happened right then, and but I feel like it takes all the miracle away from it.
Right.
I feel like that, okay, well, they just got pretty fortunate to make it out at that point. And you could say, well, yeah, but it was providence, and I guess I can see that point of view, but I don't want to take all the miracle away from it by naturalizing it. Instead, what I would say is this. I like to say this to atheists, because a lot of times they'll say, wait a second. So you're telling me that you know the laws of physics and you believe that a guy walked on water, right? And I go, yes, but think about this. I think that you're completely right. Miracles are ridiculous if God doesn't exist. But if there is a supernatural God that created the laws of physics, then it would be trivially easy for that person to enter their own creation and walk on water, for example. Like if I created a video game, for example, it'd be trivially easy for me to mod and do things the other characters aren't able to do. So those claims about miracles, to me, I don't see them as strong refutations of miracles, for example. I would just, and then the other thing is that Christ's whole thing about this generation will receive no sign. Like, I feel like sometimes when people go, well, I'd believe it if I had a sign, I mean, I think God's more like, no, you come to me and then I'll reveal myself to you. You don't just like, people want to go, well, if God does this, then I'll bow. It's like, well, no, God is not going to bow to your will, Right. So those are a few things I would say about all that.
Okay. One of my, probably my favorite thing in the Bible, my favorite character is actually Deborah, and I like the story of Jericho, but my comparison would be, the crimson cord in the window, and the army marches around. When they blow the shofar, wouldn't it make more sense that she let Rahab let in like 2 spies, and they from the, or maybe more, but that was the sign to like let them like do their thing. And the Bible, the way they wrote it, might have been like it was the ark did it, but they kind of like set it up like almost like a spy story. That's just the way I see that. I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
maybe you can explain, like, what are you getting at? Like, what's the implication behind that? I'm trying to figure out.
The story, you know, you have Rahab. I think she's a prostitute. She hangs.
Rahab, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Rahab, sorry.
No,
She
no.
hangs the crimson cord. So they say
Yeah.
not to kill her,
Mm-hmm.
but like she lets some of the Israelites in before everything goes down.
Right.
Like, so to me, instead of like they use the shafars as like a noisemaker to distract, and then she let the people in that opened the gate, and then the story got turned into, well, you know, it's a miracle that the walls fell. But to me, I always thought it just made more sense, like I said, like almost like a spy story. Like they had intel, got on the inside. Doesn't that make a little bit more sense than, you know, the walls vibrated down?
What do you mean by it makes more? You're saying that it would make more sense that they all snuck in rather than the walls
Well,
fall?
she snuck a couple people in who were able to, you know, open the gate or
Mm-hmm.
something like that, and so everything, you know, they marched around the city so to keep the people in Jericho occupied, and they were watching that while the other thing, you know, the rest of the story like fell into place. Because that's just the way I'm trying to personally rationalize that story. Because, like I said, almost if you look at the, you know, the way those stories go, it's almost military accurate. Where Moses to Joshua and down are the leaders. So a story like that, though, is presented where the Ark of the Covenant did it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I'm just wanting to get your thoughts. Like,
Well,
when it
I would
make
just say
it, go
that,
ahead.
yeah, I would just say that, yeah, sure. They allowed, they snuck in, and that's that specific story about the spies where it was to maybe make a point about Rahab and a Gentile being brought into the fold of God for her faith, and you know, so I think that that's partially why that's a part of the story. But then the other part about the walls coming down is about destroying Jericho. I think
Right.
that's more about the destruction, not about the way they got in. So I think that has more to do with God's judgment on the city, you know. And I find it funny because the New York Times had wrote a story that said something like believers score in battle over the Battle of Jericho, you know, and it said something like you know, scientists have, when they found Jericho, because used to they said there was no Jericho, right, and then they
Right.
unearthed it, and
Yeah.
when they unearthed it, scientists theorized that the walls of Jericho were actually probably destroyed by an earthquake, and that's
Right.
more realistic. And so I would just say, like, you know, for me, it's almost like or, you know, here's another thing: is God could have done that as a providential thing. You know, the walls could have been, to them, maybe they were destroying that place because they didn't like Jericho, for example. But for God, it could have been a providential thing where um, those walls falling, you know, and being dug up later could be used to strengthen faith, or, you know, things like this, you know, that, for
Yeah.
example, and so they could be used in that way. And I think that any of those explanations are fine. And I would just say that, but that whole thing about how scientists say that it was probably an earthquake that dropped them and things like that, and, you know, all the different, it almost seems to me like when people find clues about something that the Bible claims happened miraculously, I don't think you could convince anybody. So, for example, even if today you were to have seen a video of Christ walking on water, because we had video cameras and people filmed it, they would just, later on, that you showed it to somebody and they just go, "Yeah, well, I watched Chris Angel walk on water the other day too."
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so I
Okay.
mean, I people, a lot of Christians seem to run away from the miracle objections, but I kind of like prefer to talk about those things because I think that it's sometimes, because I think that what I like to do is relate to the person I'm talking to. I like to say things like, "Yeah, miracles are stupid if atheism is true." But of course, if there's
Right.
a God, then it's trivially easy to walk on water or turn water into wine or something. You know, it's super trivially easy for God to do that, right? Because He created everything. It's like me modding a video game if I created it, for example.
Right. Okay. Jumping off the back of that story real quick, because that had the Ark of the Covenant in it. When it comes to things like that, and you have, um, the Spear of Destiny, the Ark of the Covenant, and the Holy Grail, do you think that those things are real and are out there?
Um, Perhaps the Ark of the Covenant is, still out there. There's a lot of how can I say this? There's a lot of, let's say, there are a lot of things that I would say happen in the Old Testament that are a precursor or a foretelling of something to come. So, for example, the Ark of the Covenant, you could say, was prefaced by the Ark of Noah, right? That carried
Right.
the seed that would produce Christ, through the chaos and through the abyss, is what the ocean was, is called the abyss, and it carried it through the abyss and produced, and he came out on the other side fine or whatever. And then you have the Ark of the Covenant, which went with the people and helped them throughout their walk. And then you have what I would argue Christ is kind of the ark of God as well, in the sense that the ark was like is where in the Holy of Holies, only the priest could go in there.
Right.
And if you look at some of the passages about the ark and about the angel that led them and about the pillar of cloud that surrounded, there's a very interesting tale, but try to shorten up this answer. I believe the ark could be definitely something. The Spear of Destiny, I think that's just a legend. I don't know if that's not a biblical thing. If I don't know of a verse. Would you know of a verse that
they say it's the Roman pierced Christ's side with it?
Yeah, I've heard that. But what I'm saying is,
uh,
I don't think there's a verse in the Bible that talks about that spear as if it has some type of destiny significance to it.
I've seen from, like, just one example, like Hitler was actually looking for it because the legend says whoever carries it in battle is going to be victorious. Now, he got that knowledge from, like, Tibetan monks, and they traced it back, but I just know that they say that's what pierced the side, and I've heard the Romans' actual name, I think they have, but that was just in the realm of any of the artifacts that could be out there. And I just want I like to get the opinions, like, the Holy Grail could just be a cup and it didn't need to survive, and it's just part of the
legend. So the Spear of Destiny part, I don't. There's nothing in the text that says anything like that. It just says that a Roman pierced his side so that blood and the serum, like water, were separated. It's just to indicate massive heart failure and that Christ really died.
Right.
But the spear itself, there's nothing, of course, that says, well, the spear was taken and used and this way or that way. Same as the Shroud of Turin and things like that. So there's nothing in the scripture about any of that stuff. But I think that the Da Vinci Code and other things like that really popularized that, the fact that there could be these artifacts that could be used and things like that. But I don't know, because when Christ died, he says it's finished, and I just think that I don't know. That's a good question. I just don't know enough about it, and I typically won't want to stretch farther than what Scripture says. But you know, there's always the
Yeah,
possibility, right?
yeah. That's one of those things where people talk about proof and like, well, what kind of proof would you need? And I always want somebody to bring up something like that. And they talk about other things because when I hear about the Ark of the Covenant, I would like I heard I say research. I don't have any citations next to me, but uh, I think right now they say Ethiopia is the most likely place because there is a church that's always guarded and the priests go blind all the
I
time.
heard that. Yeah.
Right, like that to me, that could be a possible answer. So, but like when they say when they were walking through the desert and manna came from heaven, do you take that as literal?
Yeah. So the
Okay.
manna I'd take as a I take that to be a that God used some type of means to help their to help them sustain. I think that with the manna, and I've mentioned this before, Jordan Maxwell and others have kind of made these ridiculous claims about the manna was mushrooms and they were tripping and all this stuff and there's a great Chris White does a great debunking of that. I think it's called Jordan Maxwell Debunked or something like that, where he goes, uh, "I really, because I've done mushrooms before, and let's read what it says about the manna from heaven. It tastes like honey, and he's like, I don't know if you've ever done mushrooms, but they don't taste like honey very much, So um,
Okay.
there's been a lot made out about this manna, but I don't I don't actually. I just think that it's something God provided. I mean, I would appeal to a supernatural thing and say God used this to sustain them or whatever. So
Okay. No, that makes sense. That's just one of those other type of things. Yes, that would be a miracle, and I'd love to find somebody to answer that. But all right, gonna jump a little bit to the New Testament. When Jesus prayed in the Garden of is it Gethsemane?
Gethsemane, yeah.
Right. I always found that odd that if he is God, why is he literally talking to himself? Like, why would he need to beg himself? Like that type of like, if he is God, like the way, like the Trinity has always been presented. The best way to me is it's water. It's the same thing, but it could be gas, it could be ice, and it could be liquid, but it's the same thing. So was he literally like talking to himself?
Right. So that's a good question. So, like for example, if I say that, this is what I like to say: God is not a name. God is a title. But within God, there's multiple persons, same as Congress. If I say Congress made a decision, I don't mean that one person made a decision, right? I
Right.
mean that multiple persons under this title of Congress made a decision. And so what I would say is that if you look at, for example, in uh, Philippians chapter 2, the Carmen Christi, it says, talking about Christ, it says that although he existed in the very form of God, did not find the equality that he had with God something to be grasped or held onto, but instead emptied himself to take on the form of a human. So, what I would say about that is Christ partially limited his equality with the Father to take on flesh, right? So it's not that he doesn't have an equality with the Father, but if you have an all like what we might call an all-powerful person, you might say, well, then does he have the power to take on this other this limited nature? Well, if he's all powerful, I would think he would have the power to do that, partially limit
Right.
power. And then I like to use another example, which all examples are going to fall short at some point, but like, for example, if you know how like you have in a group, like if you're in a group on like in a forum and you have your administrators, right?
Right.
The administrator can partially leave their administrative position and take on a sock account that doesn't have administrative privileges and go into the chat in order to accomplish some goal, but then could still reach out to the administrator that they're friends with, their co-administrator, and say, you know, and communicate with them in that way to still have that power or effect. So I would use those examples for.
All right, that's a really good answer. I like that.
Appreciate it.
When it says that no human could withstand the voice of God, when the Bible, anywhere in the Bible says that God is speaking to somebody, do you think of it like the Metatron, like there's a voice, like they're just saying they spoke to God, but there's always an mediator? I know the angels are called messengers, but they speak a lot about the voice of God, like a human cannot withstand it. Do you consider that all those instances are an intermediary in between?
Are you referring to the passage that says that humans cannot withstand seeing the face of God?
I always thought there was one about the voice too.
Not that I know of. Maybe okay. Praise or One Way or Gavin or Tony Designs or somebody in the chat can tell me if I'm wrong about that. But I just know about the passage that no one can stand the face of God. But then I would just say that is talking about something like God, the being, that's not manifest in let's say a material person. So for example, there are multiple passages in the Old Testament, which is why, you know, a lot of Jewish people before always believed God had multiple persons so there are multiple passages that say things like, and then we're talking about this angel, the Yahweh on the earth, and it says, and then Yahweh called down fire from Yahweh in heaven, you know, things like that. So I just say that, you know, a lot of times it seems like they're dealing directly with Yahweh, but when it says things like you couldn't see the face of God, I would say that would be like the actual God's essence, his immaterial being that's not part of this. So, you know.
Okay. Well, like to me, I think of like when they say Moses, you know, had a different skin color and glow and his hair turned white when he came down from the mountain, you know, those kind of instances. Mm-hmm. So, you know, either voice or visual, you know, I always wondered like all the, you know, so, you know, I see what you're saying. And so, one other big question, why do you think Jesus didn't write anything himself?
Why do I think he didn't write anything?
Yeah, if he came to Earth, everybody in the Bible is telling stories about him or speaking of him, but couldn't he have just written something himself?
Sure. I've had
to make it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I've heard that question before, and you know, I like to give a coherent answer anytime I can, you know, but I would like to say, first of all, I'd like to admit my ignorance and say, I just don't know. That's okay. You know, I just want to be honest about that and say, I don't know why Christ never actually wrote anything himself, but I would just say that, so scripture is said to be God breathed. So theopneustos. And I would just say that means that Christ did write scripture, but penned it through means like writers and so forth. And another thing that I've heard people say, and I don't know, I haven't really parsed this out this far, but some people say that you know, that Christ wouldn't have written anything because he was the son of a carpenter. Like the Pharisees would say, like, isn't this the carpenter's son? Like, what? How does he know
Right.
things? And like, they're basically saying he's never been to seminary. Like, you know, what is he talking about? How does he know this stuff? And so I don't know if he was able to write or not. I'm not 100% like his human person. I mean, you could say, well, he's God, he could write, you know, but I just
Yeah.
mean like God uses means, and I think that he used people like Paul who are very schooled. Like we know Paul was schooled under, you know, Gamaliel, I think it was his name. I'd have to relook that up to make sure I'm not killing that name, um, he's you know, he was schooled. He knows what he's doing. He reads and writes in the trade language, Koine Greek, and he also had other people like an amanuensis to help him and things like that. So I mean, you know, you can just take my first answer that I don't have a clue.
Okay. No, that's always, acceptable. Like that's like people say that's usually the best way to go if you don't know.
Sure.
How do you feel about, and I'm gonna say the Gnostic text, but I don't know if that's the name, but the stories with Jesus as a kid, makes a bird out of clay, extends
Mhm.
his father's board, kills a kid and brings it back to life. Do you believe those or
Gospel
not?
Thomas? No, I don't, and I'll
Okay.
tell you why. Number one, Gnostic philosophy. The Gnostic philosophy is that the spiritual's good, but the material's evil. Like
Right.
it's a bad thing. Uh, the Bible doesn't really teach that. You see, with Gnostics, Judas was a good character because he helped Christ escape his evil body and get
Right.
spiritual. But also, I would say, you know, there are other strange things that come with their beliefs. Like, for example, with the Gnostics, I believe it's in the same text as Jesus and his playmates. That it says, I believe it's the Gospel of Thomas that says, women have to become men to get into the heaven. You know, and that just
Right.
seems like a weird claim. You know, and it doesn't seem like the Bible supports that at all, and says anything like that. And then another point I would make is that I don't buy it for the same reason I don't buy the Book of Jasher and some of these other works, because they're apologetic in nature. Or
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, if you look at the story in Genesis of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and things like that, it says that then Cain knew his wife and they had children, they made a city and all this stuff, but it doesn't really give his wife's name or anything like that. Well, then you
Yeah.
get the books of Jasher that come way later, and they name this lady as his wife, and they start filling in details. And then who was Abraham's dad? Well, the Bible just says that it was some guy named Terah. Like, you don't know much about him. And then you look at the book of Jasher, and it says, which isn't a Gnostic text, I'm just comparing it. The book of Jasher, it comes back and it says, oh yeah, his father Terah, yeah, he was an idolater, and he had all these idols and blah blah blah, and it fills in all this stuff that how could they have known in the second temple about all this stuff that happened way earlier. And then Melchizedek, it says that he was Shem. It's like, well, hold on, then why is there a distinction between Shem and Melchizedek in the text? And so, and then in the same way, if you look at the Gnostics, and this is my comparison, the Gnostic text, they're looking at it later on going, wait a second, why isn't there anything about Christ's childhood? And then they're like, well, when he was a child, check this out. He was on a roof and he pushed one of his playmates off and killed him. Then they were trying to condemn him, so he raised him back from the dead and go, I didn't hurt you, did I? And then he goes, oh, well, no. You know, like
Right.
it seems like an apologetic text to go, hey, there's something that was missing there. Let's tell the story and let's fill in the blanks, where the Bible doesn't seem to do that. It just goes, it gives you the details that it has, and then it doesn't, you know, it doesn't care if you go, well, I wonder who Cain's wife was. You know, like it could have been multiple reasons, you know, that, but that's some of the main reasons why I don't buy into the Gnostic text, the philosophy, the apologetic motifs, the the theology that is involved with them, and the fact that the early church didn't accept them either, and most of them are really late. So.
Aren't those the same places you get stories like about Lilith being in the garden before?
Yeah, but the story of Lilith, again, I'm going to have to reference Heiser on this, but he done a great video. He has a channel now called Fringe Pop 321, and on it, actually, you would be super interested because he goes into UFO stuff, he goes into Sasquatch stuff, he goes into all these different claims about different things like that. He actually does one called Lilith, Adam's wife, or something like that, where he goes in, he explains all the material, and he kind of breaks it down and goes, it's not the case. Like, it's from a way later source. So, again, I feel like that's another apologetic thing where they're coming in after the fact to kind of go, well, what actually, what is the seed of the serpent? What are these things? And try to explain all these things. So,
I remember, I forgot where I saw it, but I've heard a bunch of times where they said God had a wife and they actually list the name. And I always thought that was, like, if that was true, that'd be a little bit bigger than just kind of an offhand remark.
Said that, I'm sorry?
Yeah, that I've seen where God had a wife and the name was like OPT. I don't remember how it was spelled, but that's just, I put in that same category where, like Lilith and so that's what I was trying to say. They probably seems like they all come from the same like type of way you were talking about, where they added it later or trying to give some explanation to the things like that. I kind of see the same thing a little bit in Genesis, where you kind of just turn the page and like Cain and Abel had wives. They don't really say where they come from, but I'm sorry.
Well, Cain did. It says
right.
Cain having a wife, and so there have been many ways to try and parse that. Some evolution people that buy into the evolution story will say things like, well, yeah, so the thing was that there were other people on the earth, right? There were these, earlier forms of humans, and when humans get to a certain point, God did something special for the creation of Adam, for example. And the story about humans being created from the dust of the earth is kind of like saying, hey, humans were created out of material from the planet or something like that, and that the wife that Cain took was one of these people that were not from let's say Adam's children, for example. And so and there's other, they use other things like like when Cain says it just says there's Adam and Eve, there's Cain and Abel, and then it says when Cain killed Abel, Cain got the mark of Cain, and he goes, well, anybody who finds me is going to kill me. The people are going to kill me. And then they go, well, who are these people he's referring to?
Right.
He's moving away, and people are going to find him and kill him. And then God says that no, anybody that kills you, that you'll be avenged and they'll be killed or whatever. So, that's another one of those stories that make you think, well, it seems that they're talking about their immediate cosmos or their immediate people. So yeah, that is an interesting subject. But I like how the Bible doesn't try to they don't try to fill in every jot and tittle. They just give you like what you need to know, for example.
Right. Now you're not a young Earth creationist, right?
Right.
Okay. What is your view on like Neanderthals? Like, we have found these bones, so we know these caveman type people existed, and I've heard everything from that was before the flood, and the flood separated that, and people lived, that's how you get Methuselah being 500 years old. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, there's two things there. Whenever you said that last part about Methuselah being 500 something years old and so on and so forth, that's a different topic that I was, heard you mention that because I got to briefly listen to a little section of one of your debates, and you're talking
Oh,
about people living. And so if I could, I'll go with that first, and then
okay.
re-ask me the question about evolution second, because this is fresh in my mind. I want to handle it. So
Right. Yeah.
I don't actually think that people live to that age. And here's what I would say is some of the scholars that I follow have shown that the ages of the people early on correspond to a king's list that was found. I believe it's the Sumerian king's list.
Yeah.
And numbers have significant values other than the ages of the actual people. And then you can say, well, yeah, but you're just kind of making that up out of nowhere. But think about it. Abraham, his wife laughed that she would have a baby around the age of 100. And then she says, is God going to give Abraham a child in his old age at 100? That shouldn't have been that old, right?
Right.
So it makes you consider, if the people before him were living that long, it would seem that, well, Abraham's not really, that old, to be
Yeah.
having to that 100. In fact, just generations before him, people were having kids way later than 100, if that's what the story's actually referring to. But
Right.
rather, I would say that it seems that it has more to do with the king's list, the ages of the people there. And so, for example, with Enoch, Enoch's a strange character. Like, he's a really cool
Yeah.
character, right? Like, it doesn't say much about him. It just says, like, Enoch walked with God and he lived 365 years. That's a strange number, right? It's the number
Yeah.
of days in the calendar. So, that I would just point you to that research and say that's how I would handle the ages of people there. And
Okay.
then your question about evolution, could you just re-give me like your question, just rephrase it for me?
Yeah. You know, where would you, or how do you look at like Neanderthal, caveman people that we found the bones of, and we can see like common ancestry going down? Do you see like that fitting somewhere in your scripture?
So I would say two things. One thing is I don't know that much about it, so I don't want to, definitely don't want to seem like I'm some type of resource on this, because are you still there? Looks like we might have lost ChuBs there. It looks like I'm still live. Tony or Praise or anybody, one way, let me know if everything's still good. Is the audio still good? Is the video still coming through on my side? Looks like it is. Gavin, somebody just give me a thumbs up or something.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, you're back. Okay, good. Lost you there for a sec.
Yeah, it was buffering or something on
Yeah,
my
but
side. Sorry about that.
yeah, so all I would say to wrap all that up is I take man's word over God's word. I'm just kidding.
Okay.
That's a joke.
Okay.
It's a joke amongst me and JMD. So so yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about. So I've heard all the explanations, right? I've
Right.
heard the younger side. I've heard the side from theistic evolution. I've heard a lot of the arguments about well, some people don't buy into the that these were pre-human. Like you said, some people think that they're before the flood. Some people think that, I mean, I've heard everything from, something like that, pretty mundane claims, all the way to, again, to the fringe extraordinary. Well, Nephilim were doing DNA experiments on people and just claims that I wouldn't want to associate with myself. So, I would just plead ignorance and say, I don't know. I'm willing to accept, whatever the scientific evidence it shows and move from there, because I have more of a meta narrative. Like I'm more interested in what the story, like, okay, fill in some deep, like if you can find something that like specifically contradicts, like, says Jesus was the Messiah, and then you find something in the Old Testament that says the Messiah will never be born in Israel, for example. Then I would go, oh, okay, well that's a hard one there, But besides that, I try to look at the story and go, well, it doesn't logically, if it's missing some of the things like that, I would go, well, it doesn't logically follow that couldn't happen. So, I mean, I'm not, that's not one of my strongest suits is something like that. So, but I can point you to some other people if you want. I can send you some resources on that of people that I like and that take the topics more seriously.
Yeah, I'm always trying to fill in the blanks here and there, and I'm always researching it. I guess the biggest one would be, do you look at it where God is the clockmaker that makes the clock and steps away?
God is, I'm sorry, say that one more time. God is the clockmaker
that makes the clock and walks away. Like, that, like that. I'm trying to bypass like intelligent design and all that because, personally, I always say none of us have a time machine, so we can't prove any of that. And there's many people who can fill in that blank. But I'm just asking you, do you consider it like that, or where he's been here, like, involved the whole time?
So there are a couple of ways I can go with that. So for one, I would say that God created things and saw that they were good, but that because of the actions of humans, things have kind of unraveled. So I don't think that God, for example, created cancer to be a thing. I think because of the actions of humans, death came into the world and these kind of things. So if what you're getting at is something like that, like, well, if he made such a good world, then why is this kind of things happening? Or if what you mean by that is that God just kind of is distant from the world, I would say that humans lived alongside of God in what the Bible calls the Garden of Eden, right? And I would just say that when humans were kicked out of the garden and they were kind of exiled to live outside the presence of God in that way, and that the ground was cursed and so on and so forth. So I don't know if that answers what you were getting at, but maybe if not, you can develop more what you meant.
Yeah, well, see, the way I look at it, if God, is the clockmaker that walked away, then I can look at stuff like cancer and everything that happens, is naturally happening, and God could have started it because it wasn't too long ago we thought a volcano exploding was God, or we use like Thor to describe thunder. But my problem. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, just my only problem with that is when given, like, okay, here's the Bible, God inspired word. When I see anything from the Bible, he's involved a real, a lot. I'm trying not to use any bad language. And so that kind of makes me think, okay, well, the clock, like him making us and then backing off and then everything happens, kind of goes away. But that's a big struggle for me because I can accept like what I see around me. I see we're born, we multiply, we teach, and we die, and we enjoy the life therein. But when presented with the Bible, and I guess maybe Catholic because we repeat everything a lot, as you know, I started to really pay attention to what I was being told, and God seems to intervene a lot. And so he couldn't have just walked away and let everything happen. And then I'll go, like I was saying earlier, then you have like, okay, the Bible's true. Nothing that amazing like the Bible says has happened since then. So that's a big thing for me. Like, did he make everything and walk away? But he got involved
Okay,
with everything. Go ahead.
So there's a couple things there. Number one is, I heard you make this claim that I hear a lot from atheists, and it's that you say, well, we used to believe that, for example, lightning or a volcano exploding or something like that was God. Now we know that it has a natural cause, for example. Well, I've never heard anybody really answer this way, but this is something that I've always thought, because I think about explanations and how they work, and that I don't think those claims are mutually exclusive. So, for example, that's like when people say, "Well, how did humans, come to be? Was it the process of evolution, or was it God?" Well, it's like, well, those aren't mutually exclusive explanations, right? It could be that God started the process that created humans with the desired outcome. In the same way, if you go, well, hang on, did that volcano erupt because of natural causes or because of God? And it's like, well, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I think that, or did it rain because I prayed for rain, or did it rain because the forecast was that it was going to rain, or that even if the forecast wasn't that it's going to rain, was there a natural cause to it? I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I think that, okay, if it rained because of a natural cause, it could have just been that God used the natural cause to make it rain for that purpose, for somebody's prayer or whatever. So I don't think those are mutually exclusive explanations. In the same way, I remember hearing John Lennox say, there's a pot of tea that was made. Was it because of the laws of water, or that water boils at a certain temperature, and that if you mix tea with the boiling water and with sugar and so on and so forth, it makes tea? Is that what explains why the tea's there? Or is it because an agent, my mother, wanted a glass of tea that she made?
Right.
It's like they're not mutually exclusive explanations. They can both be the case. And so then, to answer your other question about God and his involvement in the world, is if so I look at God as if, okay, so God created the world for a purpose, right? And he's going to bring about his purpose. And though humans try and thwart his plan, he ultimately, there's nothing that humans can do to ruin his plan, because God knows from the beginning what will occur. And so that God, I would say, steps in at moments when he is going to make decisions based off his end goal. So, for example, I would say that in the Bible, when it talks about God, for example, hardening Pharaoh's heart, some people go, well, hold on, God hardened Pharaoh's heart, so he kind of, overrode his free will there. Well, but before that, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. So Pharaoh hardened his heart, then God hardened his heart. So I would just say that, let's say something was going to occur freely, that God, that wasn't in line with God's plan, and God acts in the world to, make sure that the path of his plan is straight, basically. So I would just say that, like, God does interact in the world to, I guess, to galvanize his plan through, but he uses means of the world, right?
Right.
That's what I would say.
Okay. No, that makes sense. That's a big thing for me, where being told, you know, such I like I don't want to say miraculous in that way, but you know, the things in the Bible a lot are miraculous if you know what has happened. But like the story of the Pharaoh, like they don't like they go through trials, you know, like turning the rod into a snake. But doesn't it say that like the Pharaoh has his own magi or magicians that do complete some of the same actions? Or did I read that wrong?
No, you read it correctly.
Okay.
Some of the there's been multiple explanations. Some people say that they were just like your modern Chris Angel or David Blaine, that they were, you know, for example, there are ways to make snakes straighten out like that. I'm not sure those methods, but I was told this, so I would have to research it to make sure. But with, for example, the snake and the rod, there are certain I don't know if it's incense or what that can make snakes straighten out like that. But I would just say that some people basically say they're like, you know, like a Chris Angel would be today or David Blaine. But then I would say that it actually wouldn't matter to me if they were doing some type of sorcery or something like that. Like it wouldn't bother me because, you know, you have passages like the witch at Endor.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't actually be a problem for me either way.
Yeah, I've actually heard they could have rolled up a snake in a very like I don't say a carpet, but like to make it look like a rod, you know,
Yeah.
and they would throw it out. So I mean, just comparing like what you said, I've heard many different things, but I always found that a little interesting that not many people point out that he had his own people that did things, and I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. But you're right, it's probably what
Yeah.
we
Somebody in the
call
chat says, sorry to interrupt. Somebody in the chat says
no. Go
that
ahead.
if you whip around a snake, they turn hard like a rod. So I don't know if that's the case. Of course, I mean I don't know anything about you know, any of these practices, but I would
Right.
just say that either way, I don't think it's such a I don't think it's an issue
Okay.
necessarily.
Um, do you believe in the stigmata being real, happening to people?
Um, um, I guess. Do you mean by stigmata like righteous judgment or something like that?
No, people getting the holes in their hands and feet like Christ. I think that's another big
Oh, okay.
Catholic thing down here, but you know,
Okay, gotcha.
it's
Um, I don't know about that. Yeah, I'm not really that familiar with the claim. I know the term because I've heard
right.
it being used. Somebody, I remember somebody saying, it may have been on a show. I think it was on that show, Peaky Blinders, where he said, you know, I'm gonna carry out my own form of righteous stigmata or something like that. It was the character that plays the Jewish character. Are you familiar with that show?
I watched it when it first came out, so it's been a little bit, but
Um,
I believe I remember the character you're talking about.
Tom uh, Tom Hardy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he says that like carry out my own form of stigmata. So maybe he, you know, that's what he meant by it. So I'm not that familiar with it, so I would just say I don't know. I mean, I would be willing to look into it, but I don't know that much about it. Is the
Yeah.
claim that people just have holes and stuff that just occur in their hands, or?
Yeah, they get the hands and feet, and sometimes they'll bleed from their forehead, and just just like Christ. Now, most of the claims that I've ever heard or read about, it's somebody very pious, maybe a a nun or a priest, but there have been reports. I say reports, could be nothing, but like I said, maybe because I'm in a Catholic sector where, but that seems to be a big thing where they say this is a legitimate miracle. This happens to people. But I take that the same as demon possession. You know, I have
Yeah.
epilepsy. I would have been a demon back in the day. So, but that's a pretty big claim. I just, you know, like everything, I'm just trying to get your viewpoint on it. But I
Yeah, I
don't
don't.
think,
I would just say that it sounds like, and I just looked it up. It says a that it has to do with the Catholic tradition, a Catholic tradition. Let's see, marks corresponding to those left on Jesus' body by the crucifixion, said to have been impressed by divine favor on the bodies of Saint Francis and Assisi and others. So I'm not familiar with that tradition or those things occurring, but I would just say that I would personally find that hard to believe. Not saying that it didn't occur, but
right.
you know, I'm skeptical about it. So now my buddy dry apologist Caleb, he may have a great argument for it that I'm unaware of. He's a Catholic and he's pretty good at defending his view. So you know, was it you that had a conversation with dry apologists? No, that wasn't you. I'm sorry. No, that was another. I think deconverted man or something like that. So, but I was for some reason I was thinking it was you, but that would be you know something that I would ask him about, but I'm not that familiar with it. What's up to Daniel and Math Pig and everybody that just came into the chat? Let's get some likes on this video. We got ChuBs here, and ChuBs has he's a very laid back, interesting guy, and he wanted to come on and question me about some questions about the Bible and religion and things like that. And so I'm going to put his link in the description after this this I want to say hangout, this stream, and feel free to go subscribe to him. But let's get some likes and go ahead, ChuBs.
Okay. Yeah, I like how you put that because I don't like, you know, I did go in modern day debate. I like to throw my hat in the ring every once in a while just to try and do that. But I believe more in conversations because a debate means there's a winner and a loser, and that makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the other reasons I'll step up is when you hear like, and I hear this a lot, and I've actually gone into hangouts to try and talk to people because when they say like, okay, you know, atheists, you know, have a statistic of having no, you know, bad fathers or, you know, those kind of claims, I like to step up and be like, well, you know, it's funny. My parents are still together. I have a great dad. You know, my mom is very religious, and it has no effect. That had no effect on me. I have my
Yeah.
own children, and I present it to all my children. Now some are adults now. My youngest is 6, but I present both sides. I'll say, you know, if you believe in religion, this is what religion says, and you know, I like to try and break the whole, you know, atheists are evil or trying to do something. Because I've been an atheist like 33 years and I haven't tried to make anybody do anything. But the
Sure.
moment I speak out, it's funny how I don't like to say attack, but I get questioned really quick. But the biggest question is always, well, where do you think you came from? And I've always said the same thing, like I told you, like, we don't have a time machine to figure any of that out. You know, so if you want to go with what the religion says, and that's when I started to read in, and that's how I got to the questions. Like I've been, you know, I ask people like you, like, well, the validity of this story compared to this, and what could really happen. So I'm trying to be inquisitive about it because I do believe the Bible. There's a lot of stories that are true, but I personally think like somebody like Jesus is a Robin Hood character, like an amalgam of different people put together to prove a point.
Yeah,
And
that's you know kind of a Jordan Peterson kind of claim about the a meta architect. I mean um, an archetypal hero, but the amalgamation of all the archetypal heroes into the greatest archetypal hero. Personally, I don't think so. And the reason why I would say that is because if I were creating this narrative about this archetypal hero, and I was, that bright to come up with all of these things, I don't think it would pass the criterion of embarrassment, because I think I would say, well, yeah, and he had X-ray vision. He had, and I would make up all these things where when you look at the New Testament, they say things like, oh yeah, Jesus, this great hero, he was killed by his enemies and hung on a cross, which meant to their people of the day that he was cursed. And one of his followers sold him out for some silver. One of them denied knowing him 3 times. One of them doubted him even when he rose from the dead, and wouldn't believe him unless he appeared to him. The usual about heroes that you make up. No, like you don't get that if you're making up a story about a hero. Like, especially if it's going to be an amalgamation of like a superhero, right? You come up with the craziest things. You come up with, look, as soon as you've seen him, it instantly, your eyes knew Messiah. It just read right across him. Like anytime anybody ever seen him, they immediately fell down and worshiped. But that's not what we get. We get people asking them questions like, well, Moses said we could divorce our wives, and things like that. Right. So, that's the reason. That's some of the reasons why I don't buy into Jordan Peterson's thing about the archetypal. Now, there's something to that. I would say something like, maybe. So my whole thing about the divine council is that God allotted nations these lesser gods to worship, and that these gods, sons of God, had some idea about things like that there would be a resurrection at some point, for example, that there would be, other things that they put into their religions to these nations, where Christ fulfilling those things are like a way to appeal to the nation's beliefs that things like this would eventually happen. And so, there's something like that in the narrative, but I just think that if you're making up a story about something like a superhero, you don't pass the criterion of embarrassment.
Right. I think I'm trying to remember the name, but I think there's a big comparison to a Joseph from the Old Testament, where it lines up like he had 12 brothers, so then Jesus had 12 disciples. Mm-hmm. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah. So the 12 tribes of Israel.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that's one of those things. It's like instead of an amalgam, like they said, okay, we're going to take this info and put it to this info. Also to the same thing, like there's a big thing going on where like prophecies, and it's like, well, okay, Daniel or Ezekiel or Isaiah, whatever, would say the Messiah is going to come in on a donkey. And to me, that's a big, vague thing where you can nail that to anybody. And like they always use the thing, atheists, and they'll say crucifixion was a big thing back then. So, but Joseph was one where like a lot of lines met up where it looked like they were trying to say, okay, here's 12 and there's 12 over here, and then this happened, but
yeah. So what I would say about that is that in one part, I believe you're correct that something like the Messiah riding in on a donkey can be considered a general criterion, right? But there are more specific criteria, like that the Messiah must come before the second temple falls, right? So then we have to ask, if Christ wasn't the Messiah, who was the Messiah that came before the temple fell? So that's much more specific, that there's a certain time that the Messiah would be cut off. Like there's a specific thing there. And then when we look at, that's in Daniel, and when we look at the other claim in Daniel about the Son of Man that comes riding on the clouds of heaven, and then we see that Christ, when he was before Pontius Pilate, that he said, soon you will see the Son of Man coming riding on the clouds and so forth. And he kind of applied that to himself. So, that's actually what the oldest manuscript we have as well, is that passage. But anyway, that's just a side note. So I mean, I think there's some validity to that. Like there are some more general prophecies, right? But then there are some like that where the Messiah must be cut off, before the second temple. He must be presented in the temple. So how is like if I was Jewish today and not a Christian, I would read that and kind of wonder, who's the Messiah if he had to come before the temple fell? That kind of thing. So, and I might
isn't there a big thing about many said John the Baptist was the Messiah?
Yeah, it actually says that in the Bible. People were, yeah. So, but again, John was, obviously said that he wasn't worthy to even unstrap Jesus's sandals. Like, so, I mean, but John was going around baptizing. He was a holy man, so, but, that's one thing like that I would say that was something like you mentioned earlier about like, well, some people try to say things like, atheists probably don't have good parents and things like that. And, it's just a low level claim. It's just a real facile claim. And this is another one that I would say, well, like some Christians are so uptight that they wouldn't even let John the Baptist in their church. Like he wore like animal skins and like he lived off the land, like eating wild stuff. And, he was probably a brutish kind of guy, like I doubt, like if somebody's seen him today, like coming in their church, they probably wouldn't let him in.
Yeah.
So I'm just, I don't buy a lot of that. Now, do I think like it? I don't know. I just thought I'd make that point to agree with you on the whole thing about the low level claims that some Christians make, because I don't buy into it.
That's a problem I have with both sides. And like one thing that made me get in touch with you when you were like how toxic everything is, and I keep seeing it when you like just the other day said how toxic things have become.
Oh, right.
How like to me the mudslinging, like I see the same arguments from 20 years ago, and people on both sides are sticking to the same script. And
well, I think you might would now correct me if I'm wrong, but many of the arguments that I put forward, I keep having people tell me on the other side, like, I've actually never heard a lot of these arguments. And not that I made them up or anything, but I'm just saying, like, I don't think a lot of the arguments I use some of them may be familiar to people, but a lot of the arguments I use are, I don't hear a lot. So.
No, that is true. And that's some of the things I've heard you say. And that's why I wanted to bring the questions that I had to some, and you gave me great stuff to think about and to look up, because to me, none of it's just as cut and dry and as everybody's making it out to be. And
yeah, and I gotta say, like, I think what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to galvanize I'm trying to form like a more open but respectful dialogue and conversation. And like for example, we got 14 people watching and 13 likes and 0 dislikes. I mean, that's pretty awesome. Like that, I think that, and to say that, and we've got, all of like my theist buddies and Christian buddies, but as well as like the atheists in the chat and agnostics, like Math Pig and Tony Designs, which are mods. I've had people tell me like, man, maybe they shouldn't be mods, but I think that I want it to be kind of, fair in that way, like unbiased in that way. And look what it's producing. Like, it's almost like every stream that I have now, I'll get like, 15 likes. And like last night I had 2 dislikes, which I don't really care. But I think that people are, appreciating the conversation. They're appreciating me having on people like you who are an atheist and but we're not really at each other's throats, and we're not like having some big like battle. You know, we're having more of a
Right.
conversation. So
Yeah. You can, if you ask around, I always say I'm always around to people because I go into chats for both sides and I keep a little notebook and I can't follow along too much when it's like, okay, well, the the Greek word to this compared to the Hebrew, like I get that
yeah,
and I'll listen, but the question, like then people just rant on morality and it's like, okay, well, now there's just opinions a lot on this side. But
sure.
yeah, it's another thing where I thought I wanted to show you that there are people who I'm trying to learn everything. I'm trying to grasp what everybody's trying to say, and you know, I come like it's a lot. One weird thing, like Mary Magdalene, we have a school, St. Mary Magdalene, and it's been there all my life. And when like things like YouTube kicked off and there's arguments about her, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I've heard that name since forever. And those are the things that I questioned. And like I said, I read what people talk about in the Bible, and I'm not gonna say either way. Like, was there a Jesus? Like, I can't prove that. I can't disprove that. But when somebody comes and says, okay, but Jesus is the way to get to heaven, then I try and look into it a little bit more because that's obviously important. But,
Right.
you know,
Well, the way I
I
like
look
to
at,
ask, go ahead. I'm sorry.
good. No, you can go ahead.
The way I like to think about it is not is Jesus the way to get to heaven? Because you know, I feel like sometimes that people resist Christianity because of the old way that people hear it. You know, like for example, people hear words that they're unfamiliar with, like um, resurrection and you know uh, things like repentance and these old terms that you don't really use in everyday life anymore, right? Um, and so, you know, I just feel like I like to explain it in other ways. Like my thing isn't like, um, should you follow? Like, is Jesus the way to salvation, or you know, some? I would rather say like, who can I trust to tell me about God? Well, let's look at the lives and the teachings of people who claim to have revealed God accurately. And when we compare, we look at, for example, Christ. I don't think there's anybody that can compare. Lived a sinless life as he was dying, forgiven his enemies. You know, taught that you should bless those who curse you, and things like this, which most leaders wouldn't teach. You know, they would be more like, "Hey, look out for you know yourself," like you know, or you know, like claims like in Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, like cut off your desires and things like that. Like I don't necessarily think you can do that. Maybe your bad desires, right?
Right,
But not your good desires, right?
right,
So, I mean, I just look at it more like if I'm thinking, if God really exists and God revealed himself, who can accurately, who can I think accurately is a mediator between God and humans? Like who accurately revealed God? So that's, you know, that's how I look at it. But
yeah.
again, it's just my personal opinion about it.
No, that's I just came to hear your opinion. That like I said, there's a million videos that people want to see the actual, breakdown of evolution. But I'm not. I have my own theory, and that's fine. But we're talking about an all powerful God. So I like
Mhm.
to. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. One thing just to jump off. It's going to jump off topic for a second, but
Sure, go ahead.
I noticed in some of your recent videos you mentioned that you have some guitars. Do you play?
Yeah, I play.
All right. I was a drummer for like 32 years, so
Oh,
I
cool.
pick up I pick up when you notice like in D-Roy's video he has a guitar. Like I notice those things
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I've got four guitars here, and I play whenever I get a chance. But you know, when I had my son, I kind of slowed down a lot on playing. But yeah, I used to play in a band and stuff like that, and we had some pretty cool we had some pretty cool experiences. And um, I wish some of my I wish some of the places that we played at would have been caught on video, you know. But back then there was nobody really had phones with cameras and stuff. Like, you
Oh yeah,
know,
same here. Same here, man. I was in the '90s playing in high school, so
yeah,
didn't have much. But I did play, for the choir in high school. All boy religion, Catholic school. But so that's one of those things. Like like you were saying, everybody so wants to battle all the time, but like there's no like nobody's gonna learn anything that way. So I crossed the line where like I would ask my teachers, all through high school, because you had to have 4 years of religion to graduate. Um, I actually sat through some of like 1 year, half my lunches. I would sit and talk to the teacher because he's like, "Oh, how can you think that way?" And I said, "Well, let me explain it to you." So when I saw you talk the way you were talking, I was, wanted to throw my hat into your ring and be like, I am actually interested, and maybe some people can come off of this going, well, those are some good questions. So that was the main thing I wanted to try and get
sure.
across, that some of
I
us,
get it.
some of us trying to learn and I'm still trying to piece it together, but
Sure.
personally see it like I use the clockmaker thing because I love the one where people go, well, a tornado went through a junkyard, so there has to be an intelligent designer. Okay.
Yeah, the
If I
watchmaker. Yeah.
Right, so I use the
Yeah.
watchmaker because I everything is very like particular
Orderly.
that we exist and everything, but that nobody has yet showed me the clockmaker. Like there's different interpretations, and God is one of them, and there's other gods, but you know I'm fine.
All I would say about
Go ahead.
yeah, so I guess what I would say about that is that, you know, the Bible says, draw near to God and God will draw near to you. Knock and the door shall be open. You know, these kind of things. And I think if you seem sincere, and if that is the case, which then I think you're on the right path, right? Of course, um, but sometimes we try and, like, we don't want to make a commitment until we fully understand things, and
Yeah.
so I can see the agnostics point where it's like, yeah, but I don't know enough to kind of make that decision or whatever. But at some point you have to, because think about it. Like, think about getting married, right? You have you know, you're dating somebody, and then you're like, well, I'm still waiting to see if this is the one, and it's like, well, at some point you can't just wait forever. At some point you're gonna have to choose, or she's gonna find somebody else that is ready
Yeah.
to make the commitment, right? And I think God appreciates those. Um, God appreciates when somebody um, doesn't lean on their own understanding, right? Because the Bible
Right.
says, "Lean not on your own understanding, but God will make your path straight." So I would just say that at some point with people, they can get so far to where they go, "Okay, I understand what the story's saying. I understand how you can rationalize the text. I understand intellectual, but at some point you have to move past the intellectual and go, all right, but am I willing to make that spiritual? Am I willing to be vulnerable? Am I willing for people to see me be baptized? And these kind of things where if I'm an atheist, I'm thinking, what? Get baptized? Like, hold on, because then all my friends are gonna see me get baptized, and then what if after the fact I decide that it's not for me, or I change my mind, or all these things running through your head, and you're like, but at some point, if to people that are non-believers, at some point, if you want that to become real, you're going to have to take that leap of faith, and go, hey, look, I've got some evidence, but I don't know. But that's what faith is having evidence that, but not proof, you know.
Right.
So at some point, yeah, you'll have to make that decision on your own. And but like I say, I think you're on the right path. I think that you're doing a great job, and I hope that we can have more conversations in the future. Um, and let me just say to everybody else before you go on, if you have any questions for Chubbs or myself, go ahead and put them in the side chat and tag me at Converse Contender, and I'll check out your question. All right, go ahead.
I can, as far as looking into, I can tell you, my mother's side of the family is German Jewish. They survived Auschwitz,
Wow.
and I tracked down through, because my mother had a cousin who passed away early 2000s. She still had the tattoo on her arm, and I looked into it, found the family and the people on this side who bought their way to come over, and like kept looking into like what, because as a kid I noticed they had menorahs in certain houses, and so I'm looking into that side as well. But so I don't leave anything off the table. I'm trying to keep asking questions, and that's the one thing I hope, like you said, we can try and stop the. I mean, I see the infighting, like religious groups, like the Baptists are saying
Yeah.
Jesus' name is this, and I'm like, well, what the heck does that matter in the end? Like they're hanging their hats on the wrong thing. So
Well, one thing I would say is that those people get views. The
yeah,
people who think about it. If you look at the subscriber count for people that are dramatic and people that, dramatize everything and people who are always arguing and bickering and that kind of thing, they've got subs, And so all I would say that is if people want to promote, like if somebody likes my channel and you go, well, this guy's who needs to be, arguing for the Christians, not drama, drama John or whatever, then, promote the channel or suggest the channel or say, hey, you need to go on and talk to Converse or whatever, that kind of thing. So that's the only way is like to sometimes when people aren't very controversial, you don't really like link to their channel because it's like, well, he just had another like normal conversation with somebody. Like,
right.
It's usually like, dude, you see that dumpster fire? Here, I'll shoot you the link.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
That's my channel's. It's for entertainment, like trailer reviews to comic book stuff, because I never wanted to hang my hat on being an atheist. So I've been watching forever and talking to whoever willing to talk and have these kind of normal conversations. So yeah, if I'd love to talk again. I'm always writing stuff down, so I'll have more questions in the future.
Sure. Somebody asked, why is your name Chubbs? Like, is there something behind that? Just a nickname?
I got that nickname in the 5th grade because I've always been a little overweight, but it's a friendly thing, but calls me that around, my life. So I just keep using it. It's not derogatory, but like not only my parents really using my real name. So I just keep using Chubb.
Sure. That's fine. All right. True Gamer says, what convinces Chubbs that Jesus appears to be from an amalgam of these other figures? May God bless you both. Great stream.
Okay. Like I said, I use like the Robin Hood like cross reference, because that is a person who like they can find stories about that type of character, and in the end they put them all together. So to me, like the person of Jesus who had the right message and was like, was known for, okay, he was hanging out with the rich people, he was trying to talk to his equal. To me, there could have been, and the Bible points out many, they use the word prophets or, so I think they had to say, well, we need a patriarch. And so they use the best of the best people. But I don't personally believe, like people used to say, Jesus was either who he said he was or a crazy person. And I turn that on its head and say, What if he was a guy who talked the best about everything, but they used like the resurrection, the religious part? So that's the way I look at that, because one way or the other, there is no body. So if he existed, he either resurrected or they stole it, but we'll never find that out. But if he is who he says he is, that's a big claim. But like I was talking about, they point out other people in the Bible who had, like the Joseph with 12 brothers, so Jesus had 12 disciples. So that's where I get the amalgam reference from.
Yeah. So one way, again, ask, and I think this is a Star Trek reference. I'm not 100%, but I think the last time that's when I figured out it was. It says ChuBs, pick Picard or Sisko. Am I saying that right?
I know. I don't know the second name. Watched the Captain Kirk and Picard, and I go with Picard Next Generation.
Okay. One way. Let me know what the thing was. I know Tony Designs will know as well about what that is. What those are referenced to. All right. So Braxton Hunter has a book called Letters from Ignorantia, and he discusses numbers. Okay, so that's something that's in the chat. Jesus Lord is here. One Way, True Gamer, Math Pig. Appreciate all y'all stopping by. Praise, Titan, Daniel. Appreciate you being here as well. Tog, this one guy, and everybody else that stopped by. Tony and where's Holy Spackle and those guys at? Get them in here. All right. So, is there anything else that you wanted to add? He One Way says it's Star Trek, TNG, and DS9 stuffs.
Yeah, I didn't get to Deep Space Nine. By the time that came out, I was having kids. So
yeah, I understand. And Praise had a question here. My question to ChuBs is, what is your stance on the Shroud of Turin?
I believe it was made in the 1500s, the medieval times, to not maybe trick people, but to kind of bring people something to believe in. But I think if it was real, we could have figured it out by now.
Yeah, I understand. So, all right, and Praise says Holy Spackle is female. I know, Praise. When sometimes I use guys in a colloquial way, just like what are you guys up to, and I don't necessarily mean like men, So, but I am aware of that. But thanks for the clarifying, just in case I wasn't. All right. I guess that's been about it. It's almost been 2 hours, and I think that this went really well. I appreciate you reaching out to me and asking me about this. I actually had another guy that I'm unfamiliar with, Tim Fish. If anybody knows who that is, reached out to me and said pretty much something similar to what you said. He emailed me and just said something like, hey, listen, I thought that, he basically said, hey, look, I've been around for a long time. I live in the UK. My mother's a believer. My dad wasn't a believer. My mom was, and I've largely had an unsatisfactory, interaction with people in the great debate community, and there hasn't really been much substance there. And then he says, now you, on the other hand, you seem more open-minded and more like a Christian, according to the text that I've read, than a lot of other Christians. And I'd like to sit down and have a conversation with you and talk about some of these things. And you know, similar to what you said, you know. So, and I appreciate that because it almost, you know, some people I think that will recognize that will not want to have a conversation because they would rather have a conversation with somebody that they can, um, you know, walk over or trash or make their view look stupid, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
don't have
I'm not trying to win anything.
those honest questions. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. So I
No,
really appreciate that. I just want to say that at the end there. Is there
no.
anything
Thank
else
you
you
for
wanted to add?
no. Just thank you for answering my questions and letting me get my thoughts out. Because, like you were just saying, there's not many places to go to do that. So, I think that's what could help all the communities. But those are the questions that I think about and try and rationalize and piece together. So
Yeah,
I
and
appreciate the.
we got a question. I'm sorry, real quick.
Okay.
Titan says, "Is the Great Debate community still around?" Titan, I don't. I get that a lot. So I don't mean by that the Great Debate community channel, but it's a term that's been used for I don't know a decade or more. That just means the community of people who debate and discuss the topic of God. That's all that means. Now the channel took that name upon themselves, you know, to make the channel. And it's a, you know, it's a catchy name. I mean, it's a, you know, it's a good name for a channel. But it seems like almost every time I use that, you know, that colloquial term, like the Great Debate community or the community of people who discuss God, I get what? Who cares about the Great Debate community? I'm like, that's not what I mean by it. So, um, all right. Well, again, I really appreciate it, and to everybody out there, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing this Friday evening with us. And if you got any questions, leave them in the comment section, or you can email me at conversecontender@gmail.com. And we had quite a good crowd here. Out of I think at some point we got like maybe 16 or so people watching the stream on a Friday night is pretty good, and then we got like 14 or 15 likes out of it. So I think, you know, I'm always appreciative of that because it means that people are showing love. So again, ChuBs, appreciate it. And if anybody wants to contact ChuBs, feel free to hit me up, or you can catch him on Twitter as well. And I'll put his link in the description after this. But everybody have a great weekend if I don't hear from you before next week. Thanks, ChuBs.
No, thank you. I'm very grateful.